I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Bill Baker with Firestorm, and we're pleased to have you joining us for this New Year's presentations. We have a new series of our forum presentations going on. Today is the first, Crisis or Consequence Management. And our presenter today is Jim Satterfield, President of Firestorm. We'd like to invite you to become our friend on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. On Twitter, we're known as Firestorm Soul and Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Please keep in mind our presentation today is not complete without accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product must be considered in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, this information should not be considered legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is delighted to have this webinar series underwritten by the New Jersey MEP. They've been the sponsor and underwriter for this series for the last couple of years now, and we're very pleased to have them as our partner in this one. You can go to firestorm.com, you can watch previous webinars in this series, and you can register for future webinars. Today, we have Joe Caratanuto and Blair Neville with us as our moderators. Joe has had a little trouble getting on. Let's see if Joe is there yet. Are you back, Joe?
I am back. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Blair. John. Yeah, just kind of a brief overview of New Jersey MEP. For those that aren't familiar with us, New Jersey MEP's focus is helping small to mid-sized manufacturers become more productive, more efficient, more competitive in what they do, and we do it through a host of different services that we provide, everything from helping companies with energy costs to process improvement, R&D tax credits, helping companies with ISO certification and compliance, obviously, as well as business continuity planning. In addition, we've also introduced a service on assisting clients with their transportation and logistics costs. And obviously, this seminar today is geared towards the business continuity piece, which now ties into the new requirements for the new ISO 9000-2015 standard. So Blair, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Great, thank you, Joe. And again, I just want to thank New Jersey MEP for their support in this over the last couple of years. It's been a great relationship, and their support has helped us provide this education and information to their clients. And we'll continue. This is the first of a series for this year, and an important topic, consequence management, because typically when decisions are made, there's always a consequence that arrives with that decision, and if you're not prepared, haven't done your homework, or don't have the plan, sometimes that consequence can be worse than the reason for making the decision. So I'm going to hand it back over to Jim, who's going to walk through that for you today, and looking forward to a great presentation. Jim?
Well, thanks. Thanks, Blair and Joe and Bill. We appreciate it, and thanks for everyone that's joining us today. And this is a 12-part series, the first in it, and there are other exciting events scheduled during the year. I'll mention at the end, but I will also plant the seed right now to let you know that next month in February, we'll be doing a workplace violence active shooter virtual exercise. And it's a chance for you to get your crisis management team around the table, go through a test exercise, a tabletop to make the decisions before, during, and after a workplace violence incident. And it's a good opportunity to give everyone a chance to see what it's like to make those kinds of decisions. So today we're going to be talking about crisis and consequence management. The crisis is generally over quickly. The consequences will last a long time. And we've talked about the fact that it's a turning point within an organization, and the trend of future events will occur from that standpoint. And we're going to go a little bit further under the cover here to identify some things that you need to be doing now, before, as well as during and then after. And when you think about it, this is a survey that we did last year across businesses around the United States, and you'll see here that, do you currently use external intelligence to identify potential threats? Less than a third of the companies did that. That's really a little scary when you think about that 70% of the companies are just waiting till something happens and then trying to deal with it at that point in time. And so today we're going to be sharing some thoughts about what you can do to create your own intelligence network, to better understand, to be able to address the consequences of the crises that are out there. And if you don't have an intelligence network, then hopefully you'll get some insights today that may help you as you're framing your plans to carry it forward. So we're in a different world today, and while we're in disaster denial, everything today is foreseeable, and tomorrow anyone may be found accountable. And we see that these types of events happen, and then suddenly somebody said, well, why didn't you know that? Why weren't you ready? Why did you wait to activate your plans? And so that's an area that we want to really bring to your attention. It's great that you've got plans. It's great that you've trained your people. But having this intelligence to be able to understand what it is in each area becomes critical. Now, I think I've shared this type of an approach with you before. How do you know what you don't know? There's a lot that you know, and that's that green section that's listed there. And then there's a light blue that says what you know you don't know. And so I think all of us fall into those areas. But our emphasis today is, how do we take that orange quadrant, what you don't know, to see if we can start to reduce that and putting you into control over those areas. And that's going to be the focus of our discussion today. So if we think about that, where do we start? And as you've heard us talk about in other webinars, the predict, plan, perform methodology, we're going to go and look today specifically at this predict block there. And it's going to be important that you know before now. All of us have bosses, and so if your boss knows something that you don't know, that's probably not a good position to be in. Generally, senior leadership doesn't like to be surprised by what's going on. And so as you're responsible within your organization for the business continuity program or crisis management or product control and quality, Joe mentioned earlier the new ISO standards for quality that now include risk. This is the idea that we have to understand the vulnerabilities and specifically what the threats and hazards are, what are their, how are they going to impact, how do we monitor them, and what are the triggers. And we're going to go under the covers in that area today in our webinar. Now, there's a misnomer out there. When you talk to a company, they go, well, we have an all hazards approach, Jim. We identify every risk that's out there. And that's a good place to start to think about, but today we're going to try to expand your process. We're going to go the hazards, and those of you who are located in New Jersey, and that's where we're talking today, obviously we remember Hurricane Sandy from a few years ago, and until that event had occurred, hurricanes probably weren't high on your list to think about, or the associated flooding, or spin-offs from those, or tornadoes. And we're in the winter season, and we've had a very mild fall across the eastern seaboard, and just now we're starting to see those winter storms coming in. But there are other things. Violence is one that we're seeing. The workplace in San Bernardino, where the homegrown terrorists came in and started to shoot, disgruntled employees, workplace violence. The exercise that we did last month on CyberBridge, the controls that are there. We're starting to see the risk being expanded, and because there are unique vulnerabilities that we have. The geographic location that you have for your company. If you're near a freeway or a train line, there could be a hazardous material spill. So sit down with your management team, and this is a great thing to do this month, and the people that are working with you around your business continuity plan say, what are the hazards we face? What are the vulnerabilities? What are the threats? What are the risks? And have this list started to be developed. And we're going to give you some tools to expand that in today's webinar and a way to think about it differently. We also think about business crisis risk, and that's a new term to you, and I think it's consistent with what Joe pointed out at the very beginning when we talked about the new ISO quality standard. As we think about the crisis risk that's inherent here, turnover is a good example that could happen. Quality issues could certainly be other factors, but they're business crisis risks that you face within your organization, and we'll give you some insights on how to think about that. For every one of those hazards or risks or vulnerabilities or threats, I want you to say, well, what's the warning sign that that could be occurring? What's an indicator? What's a trigger that would cause us to activate our plans? And this concept down at the bottom of the page, we're going to really go into today: guarded, elevated, and severe. Because if it's at a point where it's severe, then you have to act, and you have to act now. We don't have the luxury of waiting to another point to deal with this particular area. So if we're going to think about this, there are in every business 5 common failures in a disaster or crisis. The first is failure of critical supply chains. And since we're emphasizing manufacturers today with the New Jersey MEP, clearly you understand that. As you're building your products, there are certain suppliers that you have within it. Even if you're a bank, you've got critical suppliers, or if you're a utility. Even in the service industry, there's suppliers that you need to have. That's the most common failure in a disaster and a crisis. The second is failure to train employees for working at home. We've shared with you that over 70% of your employees nationally don't know what to do in a disaster or a crisis, and 95% don't have a plan at home. The third is failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks, and that's where we're focused today. That's why the little red arrow is there, because even if you've identified them, companies don't have monitoring plans in place for the threats and risks that they've already identified, and that's the purpose of our webinar today. That's where we're going to put our focus in to deal with those particular elements. Then obviously the fourth is failure to conduct exercises and update plans, and last is failure to have a crisis communications plan. And we'll deal with those types of things in other webinars in the series during the year. But in solving those, you follow this predict, plan, perform methodology. You identify and involve those that you see listed here. You conduct the exercises and establish how to monitor. That's the intelligence. And so today we're going to be focused on how you build that intelligence program within your organization to know that these things are imminent or in fact are occurring, and get control of them early in the process, and that's going to be our emphasis. So around us, there's a lot of issues that could happen. So how do you predict? How do you identify your organization's next crisis? And the answer is you have to build an intelligence network, and we start to break that apart into a series of steps. The first part I told you was to get your management team around the table and talk about the risk and threats that they see that you're facing within your company, and then focus on what the warning signs and the indicators are and the triggers for your plans, and that's how you're starting to build that one threat, one risk at a time. So can you really predict a crisis? And the answer is yes, you certainly can. There are always going to be warning signs that would go, and they'll go unheeded. And so that means that you missed the opportunity to take the action and to carry forward. And so as we look at this, this is an area that we're seeing across the board that organizations, companies, aren't sitting down and identifying those one at a time in each area so that you can see the crisis before it actually happens. And that gives you a chance to mitigate, or in some cases even prevent, those impacts from coming into play. Warning sign and an indicator. And it would happen at various points, and there'll be varying degrees of those. And we're going to give you a tool to organize those thoughts in a few slides. So we talked about business crisis earlier. In that blue quadrant there in the upper left-hand side, it's where most of business continuity is thought of in the past. Those are the natural disasters, the winter storm, the tornado, the flooding, the fire. Speed is quality, and so those things become a little bit easier to identify. If you're looking in the other three quadrants, the difficult, the chronic, and severe, you see problems that start out as a business problem that just doesn't have controls in place. There's some failure there, and then becomes chronic and it becomes systemic within the organization. You don't have the metrics in control, and then ultimately it escalates up to become a severe problem where the regulators or your clients identify that you're having a problem. Quality could follow those same areas in moving through, as we've talked about. People issues, are you having heavy turnover? Where are those elements in coming in? And so the earlier you identify it, the more that you can mitigate it, and that's why it becomes so central for us to look. So we need to know all of these things before now. And I'd like you to start thinking about a formula, and that's up in the header on the top of the slide. What's the information? Your insight. You've been in this job for a while. You understand your company. You understand your customers. You understand what the business is. So if you take information and you add insight, now you have intelligence. It's that person in the seat. It's you that can provide that element of it. So if we want to know before now, before it becomes the full-blown crisis that we're having to deal with, we start to think about where that is. And there's an urgency factor here. And urgency is a function of, is it a crisis? Because if it's a crisis, we got to know a lot of stuff really quick to be able to identify that. Obviously, we've seen major manufacturers have significant crises last year. Volkswagen with the controls of the admissions. We've seen it in the restaurant business. Chipotle with Listeria and other failures that they've had from a product quality standpoint associated with it. So crisis in understanding what it is, how do we look to see if we're having a problem? And one of the things that happens, and whether it's cyber breach or quality of your product or workplace violence threat, is most of the time you learn this from somebody else. A customer talking about it, a client, an employee having those areas. And so that's where your intelligence network gives you the insight to be able to say, wait a minute, something's going on. Something's happening. We have to intervene. Compliance is another urgency factor. If you have government contracts and you have to be able to certify that you've got certain levels of security and controls in place and having those. Fear of loss, brand and reputations, cost savings and revenues. Those are all urgency factors that lead into looking at those threats and risks. Now, the business crisis risk that we talked about on the previous slide, that there are risks that are embedded within your organization as part of your structure, part of your operation, part of your functions, looking at those things in dependencies. We had worked with a manufacturer a number of years ago, and one of their business risks were the aging work population they had. They had a lot of great knowledge within the company, but as that group started to retire, they would lose that area. That's a risk that they were facing that wouldn't be a normal business continuity plan area to look at. And if we don't eliminate these risks or mitigate those risks, they're going to have an impact on our people, our profitability, our brand, and our reputation. And so that's why we're spending so much time talking about doing this intelligence network. So what we've got to do is to identify these impending risks before they occur, before they escalate, to create the problem within your business. And that's why start with a list, then start to shift over and looking at those. Now, if we took all of our risks and we map them out, we think about they're going to have different levels of importance at what stage we're in. Now, you've seen enough of in our webinar series to know that we think about crisis in 5 stages. Pre-action, before anything occurs, onset, impact assessment, response and recovery, and post, that consequence management after the threat is over and eliminated. So pre-action is identifying the risk, identifying the warning signs, the indicators, establishing how we're going to monitor for that. What are the tools that we're going to use? Who has that responsibility? Onset is the recognition that the event has occurred and the monitoring for that to let that know so that you've got a system within your company that would do it. You're going to always activate your emergency plans first. Life and safety are going to become the most important, but quickly you'll move into that next, and that's the impact assessment. How bad is it? Did this mess up our equipment on the floor? Has it interrupted our work in progress? Has it hindered our testing from a quality standpoint? What are the impacts associated with it? If it's severe enough, then you activate your crisis management plan for senior leadership within your organization to deal with it, and then the business continuity plans on a departmental base to get them back active and restarted. So as we think about it, you've got different intelligence requirements in each one of these 5 stages. A pre-action intelligence requirement is, has everybody been trained on our current plan? That how do we know? Have you done that? Do you measure that compliance level? Have you gone to your critical suppliers? Have you looked at their business continuity plans? So those also become other intelligence elements that play into your overall design. When we look at all of these risks, we then start to map them, and we look at the impact that the vulnerability would have versus the certainty. If it's a low to a medium impact, that's normal operations. That's the stuff you've made your career doing. You know where there's problems, you're going to solve it, you're going to deal with it. But you need to spend more attention in those that go above that horizontal line. Even if they're low to medium certainty, you've got to have contingency plans of what are we going to do in thinking about that. If you carry that forward to the next level and it's high impact and high certainty, that's where all the plans have to come into play. So the new ISO standards are really talking about that warning and danger quadrant. That's why those standards are there and why you need to stop and focus on what you can do in each of those areas to say, how do we identify those? How do we monitor the risks that fall into those quadrants to be able to be better prepared? So as we break through that, this will be some new thoughts that perhaps you haven't thought of, and that's a risk derivative. And so the risk or the warning of the threat, you would list in that left-hand box at the bottom. Then you'd identify the warning sign that could be that that's about to happen. Talk about what are indicators that would be an example of that particular warning sign. What are the tools and medium that you would use to monitor that? And then how bad does it have to get before you activate? That's what the word triggers would be associated with it. And then guarded, elevated, and severe are other descriptors that you would have to be able to let your management team know. Now you see the grid in the upper right-hand side of the slide where you've kind of got that curve there in the rose color that's going along, and risk rises and falls. It's not going to be the same. Hurricane. You're not going to have a hurricane in January in New Jersey. It's not going to happen. But as you move toward the end of the hurricane season in August and September and October, it's more likely. And what we're seeing is a different weather pattern. You've heard El Nino talked about and others. So your likelihood of those in that period of time would actually escalate. In other points in times, it would be lower. Even while hurricane season is June and July, those are generally tending to be more in the Gulf, hitting in the Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama area, and the Florida Panhandle. So what we would look at are what are derivatives. So if we could be having a labor problem, attendance could be an indicator that there's an issue. It could be an indicator on communicable illness if suddenly 30 or 40% of your workforce is out sick. Those could be an area that you could look in, maybe not only attendance within your company, but attendance within the school districts where you are. And when you hear those reports, behaviors of concern. Bob was always in our meetings on time. Now he's starting to be late. Bob seems to be having some interpersonal problems with others, and there's arguments that come together. If we start to see changes in behavior, that could indicate that we've got an employee that's at risk and starting to escalate and coming in. Communication, seeing what's being said about a variety of things, and monitoring social media. We're just rolling out a program now for a large franchisor with 800 locations nationally, and looking at the neighborhood, which is a 1-mile radius in the definition for them, around their restaurant locations, to see what's happening within that neighborhood. Obviously, as we've seen the events in Ferguson and Baltimore and Chicago over the past year with the Black Lives Matter, and as we've seen more civil unrest and violence coming in, if that was happening in an area near your location, that would be a disruptor. That would be an indicator of a potential problem. Your employees may have difficulty getting into work. So looking and seeing what communications and being said on social media becomes an indicator. The location is a driver. If you are located near a river and it overflows the banks, that could certainly be something to monitor and look at. Weather in the winter or summer or at other particular times. So as you think through it, take all the risk you've thought of in your all hazards approach, in your hazard impact matrix, go through and then start to look and identify all of these other columns for each one. Now, we always are going to be at a kind of an aware level. That's where the guarded risk level, the green statement happens. And you can see in this curve, for that particular risk, it's at a low point, but we're still going to be seeing what's happening. It's the change as those indicators start to see where it moves from guarded to elevated and it starts to go up the slope of that line. That's going to say, well, wait a minute, this is starting to become a problem. We need to look at this at a closer level, and then clearly recognizing when it starts to peak, when that violence occurs, when the product quality starts to fail, when we get complaints from customers, we get canceled orders. What are those indicators? What would tell us that we've got an issue that we must need to address? So if you're saying, how do we improve the quality of the plan that we have within our company? There are two things that I would tell you to focus on. Number one, does your plan tell people what to do, or does it tell them how to do it? You want your plans to be written in a level of how, so that you can hand your plan to your newest employee and they would immediately know what to address. The second is, for what your plans have and you're concerned and you're training them on them, have you identified the warning signs and indicators? And do you have specific triggers of action to come into play? If you do that, now you're bringing your plans into alignment with standards and best practices. If you haven't spent time in this area, you're still behind the curve. Now, there's a way to organize this information so that everybody knows, and I'm going to show you some different tools that we have and that we've developed that would make a difference. This is a series of CyberBridge indicators, and we focus on information assets, brand and reputation, and user experience. Each one of those things could start to say, wait a minute, something's going on. It could be in the slow speed, the systems are slow, or frustration, or you've got the wrong data. Identifying those types of indicators in CyberBridge are something you could train your workforce on so that you know and better understand with that particular exposure of how it would come into play. So whether it's this or workplace violence or any of the others, you can identify these indicators, putting them into various categories, and I just use this as a sample so that you could start to focus your thoughts. Now, going beyond those types of indicators, sometimes it's better to put them into an activation matrix. We sometimes call this an event activation matrix, and it's customized for the individual organization. If you see this particular company divided it into 3 levels. Minor, which are normal operations that are handled by their organization. A category 1 is where it's been escalated up to an incident, and a category 2 is where it's been escalated up to a business crisis. So they were concerned about impacts around data security, facility, human, operation, and delivery services, power, water, social media, and workplace violence. They also wanted to have some descriptors of what that notification and activation would be in the center column. And along the right-hand side, are we notifying executive management? So if we looked at this, you could see that under the facility, significant damage to a facility requiring some period of time, serious damage causing a loss of use of the facility. If it's minor, it's no, we don't have to notify executive. It's going to cause the loss of the facility, yes, we need to do that. So understanding what you're doing with your indicators, what actions you're taking, and who's getting notified is the next step in carrying that forward. So you can see this is how this organization plays that together. It could go beyond this. The example on the right is one from a church service. It's an activation matrix for them. They were concerned about imminent weather events and imminent violence outside, imminent violence inside, imminent physical threat in the building, medical emergencies, imminent violence in their sanctuary. The example of a Sunday morning service with 1,000 people in the congregation and somebody stands up with a gun. What are you going to do? So what's the action that you would want everyone to take? That's the second column, the message that you would send, what the usher's responsibilities were, and what their crisis management team would take a look at. The advantage of these two pieces of paper are that on a single page, the people that are involved know what they're to do and when they're to do it and who they notify and how those messages come together. Similarly, with the indicator page earlier, you saw a similar level. This is a CyberBridge activation matrix. I showed you one earlier with the indicators. This would say take those same impact areas, information, assets and technology, brand and reputation, and user, then describe what's a level 1, a normal, a level 2, moderate, a level 3, high probability of a breach. You could have also called those columns guarded, elevated, and severe. Now you're seeing how you're taking your indicators, taking your warning signs, and putting them in place so that you'd be able to take the appropriate actions at the appropriate level with the appropriate group. So converting all of this information, it's great that you've got a big, thick binder on the shelf someplace that says business continuity. How do we take that and put it down in the simplest format so that there's a single piece of paper, if you will, that would tell someone what to do? Now, the new standard, and as we see the continuous improvement process that's involved as you think of quality on a regular basis, is that the plans need to be on a smartphone. Nobody today is more than 3 feet away from a smartphone, even at work. So if your emergency plans were for every employee were on their smartphone and they had to evacuate, they'd have that information. You could take your departmental plans for your accounting or your finance or your quality or your engineering, whatever your departments are, and that departmental business continuity plan could again be on the smartphone for that department. Your senior leadership could have access to all the plans as well as having their crisis management plan. Organization and access then become very, very critical. So as we're thinking about it, yes, the hazard impact matrix, yes, identifying the warning signs and the indicators, and then the specific triggers, converting it into an action plan, that's how you're making this a continuous improvement process that would impact your organization. So that's great, Jim. You shared a lot of thoughts with us. Let's convert it down into some practical things that we can do. So there are 2 things that you can do, and that's listen and look. And our goal here is to know again before now. Listening is a way to hear general thoughts that are going on. We look at streams, phrases, and words, and it's a general situational awareness. So within your organization, how do you listen to what's going on? Do you talk to your people? Do you ask them what keeps them up at night? What are their particular areas? Are you monitoring social media? What's being said about our company and our products? Almost all the cyber breaches were first learned from a customer who identified a problem, and then later it turned out that in fact had led to a breach within the company. Quality issues, workplace violence issues, behaviors of concern, fraud, theft, you're going to be hearing about most of those across social media. And so it's having the technology to do that monitoring and having that insight, take the information and the insight to convert that to actionable intelligence. So with the broad area of listening is the first step. The second then is looking. That's where we look at an event or a person of interest to see, is this thing escalating and is it not? The geocoding around a location. We set up a geofence around a warehouse for a Fortune 10 company, and we were able to identify an employee who was having a problem with his boss, and it was racist, and he came to the conclusion the only way he could solve it was by bringing a gun to work tomorrow and settling it once and all for all with his boss. So the problem here isn't the gun, it's the behaviors of concern and then intervening before that gun ever comes to work. I'm going to walk you through to let you see this a little bit more of how it would work, to look at these aspects. So supposedly, this is, by the way, a real event. It occurred last August. I'm going to kill someone at work today. Well, if you knew that one of your employees had made that statement, would you be concerned? would you want to take some action? That's clearly a warning sign. Don't know if this is just mouthing off or whether it's real. And so what you would have to then do is to do a deeper investigation. So we went from listening, now we're into the look area. Knowing I have to go to work in the morning makes me want to kill myself. Is someone frustrated at this point? It was identifiable via the other messages and images. We were able to tell where this manufacturer was, where this location was. And it's obviously not the image that the company wanted to know and to see. But that's a beginning point. If we look then, how do you proceed with that? So if you've got someone in your organization who's focused on knowing this, once they see it, who are they going to assign it to? What's the process that they're going to follow up on? And do you have tools in place to support the monitoring of all of those things and warning signs and indicators, and then a way to communicate that over to who you want to have take actions at that point in time? So if you're going to have a program that does this, you have to have an escalation plan in place to map out who's going to get the information so they know they need to act and to move forward. By mapping that out, then you're not going to have this being lost. Oh, I saw that, but I didn't think anything about it. I don't think it's a big enough thing for us to work on. So how it's going to go, and then the follow-up, you'll see, and report back to me. So that's how we convert this intelligence into becoming actionable within the processes that we're going forward. Because when we think about this, when minutes matter and that threat is coming in, the seconds count. And so all of these things are designed to bring us an awareness level before, in fact, it escalates to become that particular concern that we're focused on. So once those warning signs have been triggered, once you see that element, what is your protocol for reporting that threat or behavior? How do you know? Do your employees know what they're to do? How does that escalate and come together? Because we're seeing this information being lost. So whether it's behaviors of concerns or natural environment threats or accidents, there are those areas that you need to have that involvement in. That's how you take your current business continuity program and move it to the next level. So as we think about this, and we see some things where this person's database manager turned the investigation over, they're accused of threatening, you see the elements start to think, and it leads to ultimately to a terrorism charge. These things are there. There's someone in your company who's upset, who's frustrated. Our businesses are more open because we want to be open and aware, but in the scenario that you're seeing laying out on the screen right now, wouldn't you want to deal with it before that gun arrives at work, before those issues come into play? So there's a lot of things that you can start to do and think about. And the first question I would ask you is, do you want to know what will happen tomorrow? Think about the business continuity programs that you have in place. Think about the hazard matrix analysis, the vulnerability threat assessment. And would you want to know if some of those things that you've been planning for were about to happen? Could you afford not to know about that? If workplace violence and active shooter is a concern for you, you might want to sit in on the virtual exercise next month on February the 8th. That's for businesses. On February the 18th, we're doing one for schools. So if you have children in a school, you might want to check with that school and tell them, here's an opportunity. By the way, those two virtual exercises, they're going to be 2 hours in length, 120 minutes, are free. So there's no cost to have a chance to come and see, do our plans work? Do we understand what we need to do? You also want to make sure your plans align to standards and best practices. And I've asked Blair to, as a Firestorm principal, to try to reach out to everyone on today's webinar to share with you and answer your questions about that. You want to begin now to start to design an intelligence network. Do I think you're going to get the right design the first time out? No. But it's a way that you can start that process now. And we start to go back to that slide about how do you know what you don't even know. And so that's the area where we're starting to begin to focus on reducing that so that you know what you know and you know what you don't know. So this is opening. That instant access tool that I mentioned, I think is a very logical next step, because the more that you're getting the information in the hands of the people that need it when they need it, the higher you're going to be, or scheduling some training and other actions. There is going to be a brief about today and talking about crisis and consequence management. It'll be up on our website shortly if it's not there now, and you can download that. This webinar is also has been recorded or is being recorded, and if you want someone else in your organization to watch or listen to it, that would be available for their use. I wanted to also go back to Joe and to Blair to see if you have any comments or observations. And again, Joe, thanks to the New Jersey MEP for underwriting this webinar series.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, no, I think that one of the things that you talked about of, not knowing what you don't know what you don't know, and then I think more importantly, sometimes asking the questions that you wouldn't otherwise think to ask is a very important part of the risk assessment. And the risk assessment that Firestorm offers is a very formalized assessment that kind of gives more of a comprehensive look at a company's risks. And so I just want to remind everyone that that assessment is available at no cost to manufacturers in New Jersey. And you can request it through Firestorm or through NJMEP.org.
Blair, any observations?
Yeah, just definitely. One point, Jim, when you were going through it, I didn't want to interrupt you, your flow at the time, but I wanted to make a comment. You were talking about just understanding your own business, but one thing about the manufacturers, every one of them are part of a supply chain and have a supply chain. So as much as you think about your own business and think about your operations and your facilities, you have to start to extend this into the supply chain for two reasons. One is your suppliers can be as vulnerable, can be very vulnerable, which can affect your business. So you have to have those discussions with them. And also, as you're a supplier, being able to talk to your customers about how you're prepared and how you protect their business is a great selling point. So there's two ways to view it, and I just wanted to stress that that supply chain and having the discussion around that is very important.
Great and good insights, and clearly supply chain and focusing on them becomes critical. I'd like to thank everybody for spending some time with us today to talk about this. If you've got questions, you can send us, you can go to firestorm.com and fill out a contact form, and we'll reach back out. You can also send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com or call us at 800-321-2219. You'll see the logo there with the 10 years. Firestorm is this entire year celebrating our 10 years in dealing in this area, in becoming America's crisis coach. And I think it's important that the lessons that we've learned go into the planning and the insights that we're sharing with you within your organization. So part of our Give Back program are these webinar series, the virtual exercises that we'll be doing this year. We're going to be doing 6 of those. We did 2 last year, so we've tripled it this year. And so this next round on workplace violence and active shooter coming up next month is a great opportunity for you to test your team and where you are. Thank you for what you're doing every day in your job and making sure that your company is prepared and that your workplace is safe. Thank you again. I look forward to speaking with you, and until our webinar next month, have a great year. I think we're off to a wonderful start in 2016. Let's build on the momentum that's in place. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Goodbye.